Alrighty, welcome back. So we are on the second part of chapter 12, dealing with largely the slaves and slavery. Okay, so expansion is going to split the plantation elite, so they're going to be more spread out. Traditional Old South aristocrats, so wealth from rice and tobacco. They're going to live in the Chesapeake, South Carolina, Georgia. And you have capitalist planters, so people who are in these cotton-producing states who once realized, how profitable cotton would be. They're kind of the newer ones, and they're going to be in the Deep South. Aristocrats marry their children to one another to maintain privileged identity. Men were planters, merchants, lawyers, newspaper editors, ministers. They lived extravagantly. Rice plantations were the wealthiest in the Chesapeake and the Old South. Production of goods changed with migration and transfers. Tobacco farmers moved west to gain wealth from cotton because tobacco kills the land. And so once you've been producing tobacco for a little bit, it's hard to continue. It depletes the soil of all the nutrients. So you have a lot of work to do to grow tobacco with the soil afterwards. Planters' aristocracy defended slavery as a positive good or a normal condition. Some required slaves to attend church services, building churches on their land. They attempted to shape slaves' behavior, and they used religion to justify slavery. Many absentee slave owners lived in urban areas. If you watch the film 12 Years a Slave, there are two different religious services, and one where, it's benevolent God and he's reading from the Bible, and another where he's interpreting the Bible in a negative fashion for his slaves. There is less extravagance in the Deep South among capitalists. Slavery is more harsh in that region, and slaves resisted the system more vigorously. Unlike in the Chesapeake, where the slaves gained other skills, cotton production was labor-intensive. So you have kind of this gang labor system occurring, used to increase output and keep slaves working at a steady pace. By the 1840, gangs were producing approximately 4 million bales of cotton annually, which is quite a bit of cotton. Let's see. Okay, so this is kind of the inherent brutality of slavery. So you can see that this was not necessarily a well-behaved slave. He was lashed quite a bit, likely for refusing to do something or failure to complete work, attempting to escape, working too slowly. There was a lot of reasons people would lash slaves. So this is a photograph of that. All right. Approximately 5% of the white population in the South owned 20 or more slaves. So basically, if you were a planter, a cotton planter especially, and you had a plantation, you generally had a minimum of 20 slaves. And that was kind of your, that's where you knew you made it. Another 20% of the population owned between 6 and 20 slaves each. Lawyers had wealth, either owned slaves or managed the financial affairs of those who did. So, although not everybody in the South owned slaves, you do have a lot of connection even if you aren't a slave owner. So, the majority of people in the South are going to be your small holding planters and your Yemen farmers, so on their small family farms and whatnot. They would own between 1 and 5 slaves and less than 100 acres of land. Those slaves it's going to be a different environment. Because on these small farms, these owners are working with the slaves a lot of times. So it is going to be a very different type of experience there. They did want more land, but they either could not afford it or they were waiting to inherit it. Wives of the Yemen farmers had little power. They lost all legal identity at marriage. Women participated in evangelical Baptist and Methodist churches. And they outnumbered men by a margin of 2 to 1. So women were the dominant group of people going to church services, but it didn't seem to matter on them even getting a say in the church. Let's see. Poor freemen, so propertyless whites, they really have no social mobility. They don't have any way to really make a large amount of money. Slave owners refuse to pay taxes to fund public schools, so you don't have any kind of public schooling. You have poor white men struggling to get jobs that require labor. Because landowners preferred slave labor. It is cheaper And if they are not doing the job correctly, they can beat them, or they can do whatever, they not feed them, or whatever the case may be. A white person, they would have to pay their wage and whatnot, so it would often cost them more. Let's see. They served in slave patrols as a requirement of citizenship, even if they did not own slaves. They enjoyed the psychological satisfaction that they were ranked higher than blacks in Southern society. When possible, they migrated to the west of the Appalachian Mountains, where they hoped to establish a home or a farm with family members. So as we move through westward movement, the Homestead Act, etc., which we'll talk more about as we get closer, you will have a lot of poor people moving westward to get the opportunity of free land. So, all right, one last picture. This is a white family from North Carolina. You can see they do not look well off. Mother has a child. There's a daughter and a son there. That's probably everything that they own. You see they're not even in a wagon or anything. You do have a cow kind of there in the background, so they may own that cow as well, possibly that dog. They're very poor, shabbily dressed, and it is likely that they are working on moving westward, trying to figure out a way to make a living. So that will get us through the second part of Chapter 12, and we will move on to Part 3 in the next one. So have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening. Bye.